Hi, everybody. I'm Kelly. My Facebook name is Kelleigh, Kel Leigh. That was so that clients couldn't look me up. I had a child client who was on the spectrum, was really good at computers, and she would always find me on Facebook and try to add me. So, but yeah, I'm really excited to be here tonight. I'm going to try to, keep it in an hour. A lot of these things I'm going to share with you are things I really haven't thought about in a while. But I had very interesting, youthhood, young adulthood. So I'm a very different person now, obviously. Anyway, so I was born in 1988. I'm 34. I was born in Belleville, Illinois, which is a suburb of St. Louis City. My mom was like 45 when she had me. She didn't think she could even get pregnant anymore. And I found out my mom and dad got married after she found out she was pregnant. But when I was 5, they got divorced. So my dad is an alcoholic and was a pretty bad alcoholic when I was a kid. I do remember them fighting a lot. And so when I was 5, they got divorced. I don't really remember that, but we went to go live at my aunt's house in her basement. And I would go to my dad's house every other weekend. So some of the stuff that happened in my dad's house was pretty bizarre, and I didn't really understand it at the time. But looking back now, it's all related to his drinking. So he would take me with him to the bar every weekend night, Friday and Saturday. I was the only kid there. It was like a big hole in the wall, really dark, dingy bar. So it'd be him getting drunk with all of his friends, who were in their 40s, 50s. And I just remember being fed sour cream and onion potato chips and playing a lot of shuffleboard by myself. And then my mom found out and said no more, but he kept taking me. Other weird stuff would happen. He would get pretty drunk and cry a lot to me, tell me that, the divorce wasn't his fault, it was my mom's fault. And one thing that really stuck with me was he would tell me a lot that he was going to die soon. And at one point he gave me specific instructions on what to do with his body when he died. And he wrote it down on a piece of paper and told me to carry it around with me. I want to be cremated, my ashes thrown at this spot on this river. And that started a period of time where I would like cry myself to sleep every night, thinking I was going to be an orphan. My parents were going to die and leave me alone. So I was an emotional kid. I was kind of an only kid. I had 2 older brothers. They were both 15 years older than me. So I remember having a pretty lonely childhood. My dad was the kind of person who the next day after getting super drunk, which was pretty much every weekend that I was over there, he would pretend like it didn't happen at all. And I thought that was really weird too. Like I kind of expected him to maybe acknowledge and apologize, but that never happened. And there were some pretty bad nights where the next day just was continue on, pretend like that didn't happen. My relationship with my dad, I think later on looking back, did cause a lot of like abandonment issues. And I ended up staying in relationships a lot longer than I really wanted to or should have, and was constantly looking for validation and attention from people in whatever way was available, whether it was sex or, wanting to be around people all the time. I hated being alone, and still really struggle with that. But so I went to Catholic grade school. was baptized, brought up Catholic. I'm told by my mom I'm still Catholic and I can't really do anything about it because I was already baptized. But my mom was a single mom. She was, pretty poor. And so going to Catholic school with a bunch of rich kids was difficult. I also was overweight and did a lot of emotional eating and was fed a lot of fast food, especially by my dad, who I think was trying to, just make up something in some way. So I got bullied a lot. That took a huge hit on my self-esteem. Was like a core group of popular girls, and I was like cool with them for a while, and then all of a sudden one summer they just stopped being friends with me, and that was a terrible summer. I cried a lot, but then I found my people who were all weirdos and dorks, and we love Lord of the Rings, and I was reading a lot of fan fiction. So, it got a little bit better. But thinking about like drug use, I didn't even really know what weed was. Like, we did have a DARE program. And I remember the cops coming in and telling us about drugs and about alcohol and weed being, the introductory drugs. And I just remember thinking, like, that sounds awesome. Like, there's stuff that you can get high on and just like forget about the world. Like, that sounds fucking sweet. So I went to a public high school, and I think the first time I drank, I think I was 14 or 15, and it was pretty bad. My friends were supposed to come over, and and my dad was out of town. We were all going to drink together, but I really wanted to like get started. So I got in his liquor cabinet, and I remember I started drinking his Captain Morgan, which makes me gag thinking about it. But I just started drinking. I was like, well, my friends are coming over, we're going to drink. And then I got a phone call from my friend saying I can't come over. My mom's not letting me leave. So I was just like, fuck it. I just started drinking, doing shots. I was having a great time. And then I don't remember anything after that. So I blacked out. And my dad came home later that night and found me puking on myself. I woke up to him putting me in the shower and trying to like get all the puke off. And I was just in and out, blacked out. And I remember waking up the next day and, I was like, what the hell happened? And I tried to tell my dad, like, I must have gotten food poisoning, which is ridiculous because I'm sure he smelled that nasty spice rum on me and he knew exactly what had happened, but he went with it. He was like, yeah, we should probably tell your mom you got food poisoning, which makes sense, having known that he never really admitted to his problematic alcohol use. So I also started at that period of time. I was pretty overweight and I hated it. Like, I wanted a boyfriend. I wanted to, I wanted to look good. And so I started restricting food. I lost a lot of weight really quickly. I started running at night. I started sneaking my mom's Misty menthol lights, which I'm not proud of, but I remember like forcing myself to learn how to smoke. Like, the first cigarette I smoked, I threw up. But then I just kept on because I wanted, I don't know what I wanted, but I would go out at night and run a lot and smoke cigarettes and lost a bunch of weight, lost like 80 pounds. Which was hard to keep off. So then I also found like binging, purging, and that continued for a long time. And that was really kind of like the start of my addiction cycle, was just wanting anything to make me feel better about myself, like anything to help my self-esteem. So I started partying with some cool people. At that time I was like emo. I was into emo. I had bright eyes t-shirts and hung out with guys with ridiculously skinny jeans and swoopy hair. And so even from the beginning, when I would drink, I would be the one that would black out, like the one that my friends had to take care of. And I would always wake up the next day and they'd be like, oh my God, like what, what was wrong with you? Like, I was like, I just like to drink. I always say that I think I got both sides of my parents' genes. I got my dad's strong desire to drink and get drunk as much as possible. And I also got my mom's. My mom can't, I've seen her drunk once and it was like after 3 or 4 glasses of wine. So I always wanted to drink, but I was really bad at it. Like, and this continues on, like blacking out is something that I'm very familiar with. And I don't know if that's just because I, take a shot and then you're like, okay, I don't feel it, take another shot, and just like drinking as much as possible to get as drunk as possible. But then all of a sudden, you're completely blacked out. There was a situation, I think it was maybe like the 3rd or 4th time we had drinking. It was Captain Morgan, and we went to like a Halloween party. I started going to shows, like house shows, and started getting into like pop punk music. And so we were all drinking Captain Morgan, and my friend had a boyfriend at the time. His mom came and picked us up. And in the back of the car, I just turned my head and just puked everywhere. And it was like her brand new Lexus or something. And my friends told me that they took me out of the car and had to take my shirt off in front of all of these boys. And I was absolutely horrified, like devastated. And I called the guy the next day to apologize. And I said, I'm so sorry. And he said, I had to clean your, like, clearly you ate broccoli for dinner, because I had to clean it out of the car with a spoon. I had eaten Chinese food that night, but I was horrified. And I later found out that my friends actually lied to me and they never took my shirt off, but they thought I needed to learn a lesson. So I was pretty pissed about that. But the first time I smoked weed, we were really hungover at my friend's house in her basement. And she said, I'm going to go get the can. And I was like, what the fuck is this? So she came downstairs with a Bud Light can with little holes poked in it. And she's like, this is how you smoke weed. So we all smoked, and it was really scary at the time. I was like, what the hell just happened? Like everything was won't. My friends were laughing uncontrollably, and it was kind of frightening. But another thing I just continued to do, because it had kind of started to become part of my personality, was just I got high. I love getting high. My friends and I also used to save our money and buy 10 to 15 whipped cream canisters at a time. And then we would just, sit there and inhale the nitrous and laugh, and thought it was like the best thing ever, even though it was really expensive. So let's see. I went through a lot of phases of my personality and the people I thought were cool. I tried to be an art kid. I really loved that. In photography, we would like snort Adderall in the dark room, and I thought that was super cool. And then we all started hanging out with these pop punk kids. So pop punk, like not like Blink-182, but more like punk music, but like characterized by like people going whoa. So we started hanging out with older guys who were super older than us, and we would party in like cornfields and just get wasted on pop-off, smoke weed a lot. One of those guys ended up being a pedophile and went to jail for a long time, so that was disturbing. But I finally had friends and I finally felt cool. And then I had my first boyfriend at 16. And I was so excited about that. He was the person that I started doing drugs with. So he lived in his mom's basement, so I could like sneak out of my house and I would go stay with him, or I would tell my mom I was staying somewhere else. So the first thing I did other than weed was mushrooms. I think at 16. And I do remember like the moment that I started, like it started coming on and I started tripping and my boyfriend put on Welcome to the Machine, like Pink Floyd song. And I just thought it was like the coolest thing in the whole world. And I loved tripping. I just thought it was so magical and so adventurous, and started eating mushrooms a lot. So we were listening to a lot of classic rock and started to become like hippies. My boyfriend introduced me to the Grateful Dead. And we went to my first music festival when I was 16. It was called Schwagstock. And it was like out in rural Missouri. If anyone here has ever heard of it, I will be so excited. But it became really popular. It was started off as a small festival, and the main band was the Schwag, and they were a Grateful Dead cover band. And that first weekend that I went there was the first time I did ecstasy and the first time I did acid. And I remember pulling up and we were going with this guy named Shorty, who was like super cool hippie dude, drug dealer, strangely old, but you know, I thought it was so cool. And I remember pulling up in the car and he had just like eaten mescaline and he was just like laughing his ass off and puking everywhere. And I was like, what the hell is going on? But I wanted to do drugs and listen to the music. So the first night I think I did acid for the first time, Shorty had brought me to this tent that was just like the most traveling hippie kids from California, just like super burnt out. And they puddled me with liquid LSD. So that's just like an unknown amount of acid, and I tripped balls, and it was kind of scary. My body temperature was like super hot. I was, hallucinating a lot. And then the next night I did ecstasy, which I absolutely loved. So Schwagstock became something I went to every summer, multiple times per summer. I got really into the Grateful Dead. I brought my friends there. It was just like something I looked forward to. And my boyfriend also had a friend who was a drug dealer named Johnny D, and he gave me my first line of Coke. And after that, it was just like off to the races. I love Coke. Did it for free. We would just go hang out with Shorty or this other guy. And eventually I noticed that when I didn't do it, I would have some kind of weird hallucinations. And that was kind of scary to me. And I was getting in a lot of trouble. So I told my mom, and she put me in an IOP program. And that was my first like treatment. But I kind of took a break from Coke at that time. And me and my first boyfriend broke up. I graduated from high school. I went to a local college that was like a state sponsored school, and met my good friend Meredith. I was living in the dorms. Meredith is still my best friend. And she and I turned into ravers and started eating a lot of ecstasy. We would eat rolls like a couple of times per week, and started going to raves that were like in abandoned warehouses in the middle of North City, which is just like a really desolate area of St. Louis, and had a great time. We were at a show where Bass Nectar played. If anybody's ever heard of Bass Nectar, he's now been outed as a like kind of a predator, but we saw him in a room with like 20-25 people. And school, obviously I was not doing good. Every semester I'd have to drop several classes that I was failing. I just wouldn't go to a lot of classes because I was really hungover. But I also had a job that was pretty well paid, where I was working with at-risk kids in an after-school program. And I really liked that and did well at that and was always there. So at one of these Schwagstocks, I met a couple. They went on to become my very good friends, and they told me that they were going to live at a commune down in rural Missouri, and said I should come. And I really didn't like school at the time. I really didn't know what I was doing, and I was wasting a lot of money and doing a lot of drugs, but I didn't really care about that at the time. So I convinced my mom, I convinced some of my teachers to let me do an independent study down there where I would do an anthropological research and also took a photography class where I was doing this research through photography. As soon as I got down there, I never sent in anything to either of those teachers. And I'm pretty sure I got Fs in both of those classes. I just never responded to them. But I lived down there for like 8 months to a year. It was a really interesting experience. It was a commune of about 70 people, a lot of young hippie kids, also a lot of older people. I had been there since the 70s. And I definitely learned a lot about like gardening, farming, and met a lot of really cool people, and also just partied a lot. Most of the people there drank sunrise to sunset, a lot of old heads, and people would come in as visitors. So there were a lot of like traveling hippie, kind of dirty hippie kids. My best friend came to live there with me, and we had an awesome time. We found that there was a wine cellar that people from like 20, 30 years ago had made wine down there. And it was just like sitting in this very like stereotypical, like dusty, dirty cellar. And there was maybe 20 or 30 bottles on there. And we went through all of them. There was like tomato wine. I remember that those were the last couple bottles, and we're like, oh, hell no. And then finally we got to the tomato wine, which was disgusting. But I think you only got like $40 a month. So we didn't really have a lot of money, and so we just, went for the free stuff. A lot of naked people, yes, but it was really good time. But I was just feeling really restless. I really like idolized all of these like traveler kids, and I thought they were really cool. And I was like, I need to go adventure. So I left and started traveling like them. At one point, when I was like in the ecstasy phase with my friend Meredith, I had gotten arrested for the first time. She was what was known as a fag hag, and this was a term that was given to her by all of the gay men that she hung out with. So she just went to a lot of parties with, very glittery gay men. And so I was at one of these parties with her, and I just like really wasn't feeling it, but I was pretty drunk, and there was a raver kid that I had met who wanted me to come over there. So I was driving down the highway through a very wealthy part of St. Louis, and my phone died, so I didn't know where I was going, and I was just kind of fucking driving. My friend used to put her foot up on the like dashboard. She would put her left foot up on the dashboard, and she would always drive with her foot up on the dashboard like that. And I thought it was cool. So I put my foot up on the dashboard and I turned my headlights off. And so I got pulled over, and I was wasted. They opened the door. They were like, it smells like a distillery in here. I was very combative. But I got arrested. And when I went to the jail, they were trying to interview me. They were trying to get me to take a breathalyzer. And I just said, I really need to pee. I need to pee. They wouldn't let me pee. They wanted me to take the breathalyzer first. So at some point I pulled down my pants and peed on the jail room floor. And it was a lot of pee, and it was everywhere. And that understandably really pissed them off. So I was so drunk I couldn't get up into the bunk bed to sleep. I pulled the mattress down and slept on the floor. And the next day the cop was like, I heard you made a bit of a mess, and handed me my clothes, and they were covered in pee, but I had to put them on. My friend came and picked me up in an SUV full of all of these like hungover gay guys, and just remember that. They all helped me feel better. So I did not get convicted. It got pushed down. There are some lawyers and judges in my family, so they helped me get out of quite a few messes. But that was my first arrest. And so after the commune, I decided I wanted to start traveling. And I started off, my friends were going to a music festival in Colorado. So I drove out there with them. It was called Sonic Bloom, which was a lot of like EDM folks, which is what I was, kind of into at the time. And I was like looking around for other traveler kids, and I met a group. One of them was a very baby-faced, hippie, dirty kid named Baby Steaks. And I fell in love with Baby Steaks. And he had like a terrible dread hawk, and he was just like this skinny little guy. But for some reason, I just thought he was so cool. I remember the last day of the festival. Well, we ate like rolls together and had a good time. The last day of the festival, Sunday morning, he got wasted on PBR and passed out on the ground in the dirt. And I like drew all over him. And I just thought that was so cool. So I was like, yo, what's up, you guys? Can I come with you? And they were like, yeah, sure. So I started traveling around with them. We went down to Colorado Springs. There was a group of really cool people down there. So we, partied a lot. And then the whole goal was to drive up to Wyoming to the National Rainbow Gathering. So we hopped in an old church bus and drove up there. The Rainbow Gathering is like a week or 2 weeks long. Had a really good time. My East Wind friends came, so I got to hang out with them. Maybe some of y'all know what a Rainbow Gathering is, but it was just a lot of hippies oming and trying to be peaceful. That was my first time I smoked DMT, which I thought was amazing. You're not really supposed to drink at the Rainbow Gatherings, which bummed me out because I wanted to drink all the time. But I gave some money to some folks going into town and got a bottle of whiskey for me and Baby Steaks to drink, and he declined. And that's when I knew that we were really falling apart there. Why doesn't this kid want to drink with me? So I got drunk, and after the Rainbow Gathering ended, he left and he hopped in a van and went to California, and I was heartbroken. But I was also stuck in the middle of Wyoming by myself and needed to get home. So I said, screw it, I'm going to hitchhike, and met 2 older rainbow dudes who were like, we will hitchhike with you. We'll take you to St. Louis, so that you're safe, da, 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 da. So we made it out to whatever was the nearest city. We had gotten on like this big school bus with one of the kitchens. And I remember pulling up at a McDonald's in the city. And I remember asking someone if I could use their phone. And I called my mom, and she started crying uncontrollably because at this point I was just not in contact with her. And she had no idea where I was. I mean, I was only like 19 or 20. So, that pulled up my heartstrings. But we were trying to hitchhike on the on-ramp where people got onto the highway. And there were other rainbow kids there who had just been stuck there for days because these people in the city, these like cowboy type folks, hated us. And I was like, what's up? I got $10. So we got a couple of bottles of rum and we're just drinking, hanging out. And these 2 guys that were supposed to safely hitchhike with me back to St. Louis started fist fighting, and the cops came and they both got arrested. So here I am kind of by myself. A trucker pulls up and me and this older guy with the guitar hop in. He's like, I have room for 2 people. So we hopped in. He left in Denver. So I ended up hitchhiking by myself back to St. Louis, which is terrifying now. But I think I rode with like 4 or 5 truckers, and they were exactly how I thought they would be. They were all, kind to me. None of them were super creepy directed towards me, but most of them were super creepy in general. But I made it back to St. Louis, and I was supposed to go to a music festival with some of my friends. We were going to Minnesota to 10,000 Lakes, and this other rainbow kid I had met along the way named Spatula calls me, and Spatula's like, I just bought this car for $1 in New Mexico, and I'm going to head to St. Louis, and I need you to drive it for me. So I didn't have a driver's license. I was like, I have to go to this festival. And he was like, well, we'll go and I'll drop you off there. And I don't know what I was thinking, but I just at the time was really, lost. And I said, yeah, let's go. So he came and picked me up. We drove this station wagon down to Alabama, up through Indiana. He didn't tell me that he didn't have any money for gas. And I was pretty broke too. So basically what happened is we would spange and we would do this thing called gas jugging, which is when you pull up at a gas station with the gas canister and you tell people like, I just ran out of gas. I really need you to fill this up for me. Like, would you? And then the person says, I'll just fill up your gas tank for you. I was the female there, so I was the chosen one. I got us through from Alabama to Minnesota in 4 days doing that. We picked up a hitchhiker on the way named Spike, who was a cool dude. Stopped in a couple cities and partied. And then we were in Minnesota. So we had gone through Minneapolis. We had made a little bit of money spanging, which is just flying a sign, sitting on the side of the road with the sign. And I was like, let's celebrate. Let's buy some alcohol, right? My brain was always thinking about how to get drunk next, which was pretty similar to the lot of the other kids I was traveling with. So we bought a bottle and I was driving, of course, and we were very close to this festival. And it was like Friday night. My friends were waiting for me. I was supposed to volunteer. I had put down a $200 deposit saying I'd show up. We hadn't really gotten messed with by the cops up to this point, I think one time. But we're driving down the highway, maybe an hour outside of the festival, and a cop pulls us over. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we're screwed. I forgot to mention at the time I was selling opium. So I had maybe like 8 balls of opium on me. I had put it in my bra down here. And the cop says, let me see your license and registration. He hands him a piece of paper that says, whatever his name was, purchased this car from this person in blah, 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 New Mexico for $1. And it was signed, and that was legit all he had to show ownership of this car. And I was like, we are going to jail. I explained what we were doing. I had been drinking rum out of my water bottle, so I was pretty inebriated. And he said, okay, just, keep going, just make it there. I was like, oh my God, I was so relieved. And then about 5 minutes down the highway, I looked down to like turn up a song. I want to say it was Freak on a Leash by Korn. Remember these things when they happen. And I looked up and I had swerved a tiny bit, and we got pulled over again right away. And these cops were not nice. And they were like, you're clearly intoxicated. You have nothing to show that you own this car. So we all got arrested. They ended up getting let go, but I got arrested for a DUI, and they put me in the back of a car and had to drive me several hours to the closest station. And while he was doing that, I was like, I have to get this opium out of my bra. Like, if they find this, I will be charged with, heroin or an opiate. And that's absolutely going to be a felony, especially with this amount. So somehow I was able to get my right hand out of the handcuffs that they were in. I just like squeezed it through, and the cop was not paying attention to me. I pulled this bag full of opium out of my bra and I shoved it up my lady pocket as far as I could. And then I put my hands back in the cuffs. And sure enough, when I got into jail, they booked me and they did a strip search, not a cavity search, but they made me take all my clothes off. They looked under my boobs. They looked in my hair. They made me take all my piercings out. So there I was in like this jail in the middle of Minnesota, where I know nobody, with all this opium. It was a Friday. And my friends were at this festival without service. They had no idea what was going on. So I called my mom, I called my uncle, who's the judge. There was 4 other women in there with me. One of them was this big dread-headed girl named Sunshine. And she was in there for a long time for like manslaughter. And so I gave her my cooch opium because she wanted it. And I just didn't want it anymore. She was my good friend. So I learned how to play spades. I was reading in the library. It was all religious texts, except there was one Harry Potter book. And I made sure I finished that book because someone had said, if you start a book in prison or in jail and you don't finish it, that you will be back in that jail. So my friends came and picked me up after the festival. They bailed me out. I had to go in front of the judge, and they were trying to get me to stay. They said she's a flight risk, so we think she needs to stay into her court date in a month. And I was like, hell no. So I put on the tears and I said, I just want to go home. I'm in school. I need to go back home. Don't ruin my life, please. And so the judge signed a thing saying I could leave and go back home to my mother's house in Illinois. And that was it. So my friends came and picked me up, and we had plans to drive across the country. And so I said, screw it. And the next day we drove through Canada. I didn't know if I was going to get through, but I did. It probably just wasn't in the system yet. And we spent a couple of months driving across Canada down, the 101, and had a great time. There were a couple of really, there was a couple of wild stories as a result of myself. I really didn't have any money. And so every time I stopped in a city, I would hang out with the homeless people and spange with them and get a couple of tall boys and get drunk, because that was really all I wanted to do. San Diego was our final stop, and we were supposed to go to an Aquabat show. My friend's really into ska. So we get to the Aquabat show. And I, was there for like half the show, but there was no bar. I was like, I want to drink. So I left and I walked down the street, and sure enough, there was a liquor store there. I had a couple bucks. I met a nice young Mexican man, and he bought me a couple 40s. So I sat outside and drank, and he invited me back to his house. And he said, we're going to party a little bit. It's right in this neighborhood. We're going to do some drugs. I said, what kind of drugs? And he said, speed. And I got really excited because I thought speed didn't exist anymore. I thought it was just something in the 70s and 80s. And I was like, speed? Hell yeah. Like, I'll do some speed with you. So I walk over to his house with him, and we walk into this shed that was in his backyard. And this shed was covered top to bottom in like completely naked women magazine clippings, just like butt naked. That really should have been my first red flag to turn around and say, all right, I gotta go. But I wanted to get high. His dad was in there, who was just like this nice old Mexican guy. And so I'm drinking, they whip out the powder, we're doing lines. this night goes by so fast. I have no idea what happened. I remember glimpses of lots of people coming in and out. I'm like dancing and having fun. All of a sudden I black out and I wake up and I'm in their shower. And I'm pretty sure the door was locked. I was by myself. I'm pretty sure I said I have to go to the bathroom, and I took my clothes off and got in the shower because I was hot. And I was like, holy shit. I put my clothes back on. I walk out the door. The sun has come up. I have spent the entire night in this shed doing probably meth with these kind, nice Mexican people. And so I started walking back towards the show, and I had the keys to the car. So my friends had to sleep outside. They were pissed and they saw me, and my friend said my eyes were like this big and they had no idea what I was on. And we all just got into the car and I didn't say anything and I just passed out. And I didn't talk about that night for a long time. So we drive back to St. Louis. I went to live with my mom, and I was working at Borders bookstore. And it was just like pretty common for me to like go out traveling, then come back home to make money and just be super depressed. And then I met a new guy, and my friend said, hey, I'm buying a van and we're going to travel some more. And I said, awesome. So we buy this like huge construction van. We convert it to run on vegetable oil, which was really interesting because we had to stop at restaurants and ask them for their vegetable oil, or we had to stop in the middle of the night and steal it or break the lock on it. So we traveled in that van for a long time, went to a lot of festivals. We snuck into Burning Man, which was super fun. My friends had a ticket, but we didn't. So we got underneath. We had built up a bed on wood planks and took everything out. We got underneath in there, and we came in the middle of the night, and the guy was searching and he was poking us, and we didn't move. So we got in there. We didn't have anything. We didn't have enough water. We didn't have enough food, but it ended up being fine. And there is so much free alcohol there. So I was in heaven. But again, I was still just like super lost. I had terrible self-esteem. I was just like drinking and doing a lot of drugs at any opportunity that I could. We went and woofed, which is like working on farms. We lived in Santa Rosa on an animal sanctuary farm. We went to Hawaii, and I went alone to a goat farm in New Mexico that made cheese. That was literally out in the middle of nowhere for like 6 months. That was super fun. No alcohol or drugs, out in the middle of nowhere. It was me and one French guy named Irv. And one night we were like looking around the farm for alcohol, and we found like half a bottle of vodka, and we got so excited and we drank that together, but like I barely got drunk at all. So that was like a nice period of time to not be using anything. But then I went back home. I decided after all of that I didn't want to be the person who needed help from other people anymore. So I went to go live in the city in St. Louis. I worked at restaurants and started going back to school. I got my undergraduate in psychology. When you work in a restaurant with people, I lived in like this part of the city that was just a bunch of restaurants. So we all partied together. I was drinking every single night. And it hadn't quite gotten super bad yet. It still was a lot of like binge drinking on the weekend. Well, no, I was drinking almost every night, but I didn't work until 11. I was still young. And when you're serving, you just have all this money in your pocket. So why not? Went out and got drunk every night. But there were definitely bad times. I remember one time I went out back to back, like 2 nights in a row, and I was violently ill for 2 days, just like puking nonstop. And like, that was a sign, right? I mean, there were many, many signs, but I just hadn't really gotten to a place. It took me a long time to get to a place where I said, like, this is a problem and I need to stop. I always had it in the back of my head, especially when really awful things would happen, or I would black out and be the person who had to be carried home, which happened a lot, but it still just wasn't. I didn't have a ton of consequences from my use. I had lost friends, I had pissed people off, but I was still working a job, I was still going to school. So I graduated with my bachelor's and moved into a house with some friends. It was a party house. It was bad. At one point I tried to sell drugs. I was really bad at selling drugs because I would lose them, or I would, piss people off. I would sell them for too cheap. I was just really bad at it. And I had friends that were in Northern California, and they were sending me a lot of weed, like pounds and pounds of weed in the mail. And I was selling it and making quite a bit of money. And one day we got back home. I had gone to school. Me and my friends got back home, and our house had gotten broken into. And whoever broke into the house had found my stash of weed and taken that. It was a couple of pounds, and had also found a stash of money, like tips that I was saving in my sock drawer. That was gone. It was thousands of dollars. And that was like fucking devastating. And I don't think I really tried to sell drugs after that again. I tried to sell acid, but that also didn't go very well. I had then met my then husband at the time, who would become my husband. His name was Sean. We started dating. We moved into an apartment. I applied for graduate school. So through this time, I was still functioning. Like, again, there were really bad nights and people would get really mad at me, but then I would, I hadn't lost a job. I had graduated school. I think at this time I was like 23, 24. So Sean and I moved into an apartment. I started working with kids on the spectrum with autism. And I was like an ABA therapist, not condoning it now, but at the time, it seemed like the right thing to do. And throughout that, my drinking increased, but like still, again, not to the point I was ready to address it. And I applied to graduate school in social work, and I started going to grad school. And I was still working as an ABA therapist. And that was the first time I started seeing a therapist through my school, because I got it for free. And I remember walking in and saying to this lady, I'm here because I want to find out if I can moderate my drinking or if I really need to quit. Like, there had just been enough shit that had happened that I was thinking about it. So I tried for a year to moderate. It did not work. It just didn't. I was drinking those big bottles of wine like every night during the week, and waking up with the worst anxiety, just like horrible. And I would blame it on everything else except for like all of the wine that I consumed on a random Wednesday. And so that led me to deciding to quit. So I was alcohol free for a year and a half. I moved in Sean and I moved to a house. We got married. We had a wedding. I was alcohol free for a year and a half. I still smoke weed every night, but he didn't do drugs. He was in recovery from schizophrenia, and he was like taking medication regularly and was symptom free, but he just couldn't do drugs. And I just thought that was lame. Like, I wanted him to do drugs with me. Oh, and at one point, Baby Steaks came and visited me in St. Louis. But anyway, that's besides the point. So we moved into this nice house. I'm super healthy. I'm working out almost every single day. Like, I'm super happy. I'm biking everywhere, doing really good in grad school. And I ended up graduating, was still, sober from alcohol and really any other drug except for weed, which I use pretty moderately and only at night. Weed has never really been, caused me a lot of problems. I'm not going to say it hasn't been problematic, because I know there are times where it has. But at one point, after a year and a half, it was the summertime, and I was like, I really want to try to drink again. Like, I think I can moderate it. And I put a lot of thought into this. And I even went and saw a therapist and explained to them my plan of, I'm gonna try, this is my specific plan. And if I start going down a bad road again, I will know and I can stop right away, right? Because we all think we can do that. And the therapist was like, yeah, it sounds like you really know what to do there. So I tried moderating. It was okay at first. I think part of the big reason that I wanted to start drinking again was because I was really bored. I was in a codependent relationship with someone I spent every night with, and really didn't have a lot of friends or social support. I never went to groups or AA or really told too many people about it. So I really just did it, tried to do it on my own, which was okay for a while. But then, of course, I didn't have the reminders of why I had quit. And it just kept creeping back into my head of like, you need a social life, you need friends, and this is what's missing. And of course you can moderate because it's been a year and a half. So I tried moderating, and again, it was okay for a little while. And then some real bad shit went down in my marriage. My husband's parents, he found out his dad had been cheating on his mom for 9 years or something. And we had made a decision to try having an open relationship, and that went really, really bad. And one day I had started dating somebody. It's actually the person I'm with now. And he just came to me and said, I don't want to do this. I'm going to leave. And that was really the first time I had heard that he was having a really difficult time with what was happening. But the first time, and he left. And I don't blame him because I know that I had started drinking and partying a lot and just didn't really care a ton about his feelings. So we had been married for 2 years. We did end up getting divorced, and that was really hard. And with that, my drinking just fucking spiraled. I was drinking a lot. I was partying a lot just to not feel sad and lonely. I had gone from one relationship straight into another, so I had no time to heal. It was a really terrible idea. I met my partner's friends. They had all gone to engineering school in Rolla, so they were all, high functioning, but younger, and they liked to party and do drugs. And that's when I was introduced to ketamine and loved it. So ketamine, coke, and MDMA were all in a rotation on a regular basis. We were going to a lot of shows and music festivals. But my mental health just started to deteriorate really bad. I wasn't taking care of myself. I had graduated from grad school and had a job in the field. I was working in mental health. I was a community mental health worker. So I had began this when I was sober. I was a substance use therapist and worked with people with co-occurring severe mental illness. So I would go see them at home, folks with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder who were also addicted to, primarily crack, PCP. Some of them are homeless. So it was incredibly stressful. And I felt like a huge hypocrite being in this position after I had started drinking, and that went downhill. So I moved to a different job, but I was still working. I knew that my mental health was starting to get really bad. And I felt a terrible amount of guilt and shame over the divorce. And I just never really worked through it. So my partner and I went on a 2-week road trip to California to a music festival. It was like psych rock. And the day we were supposed to leave, I had gotten really drunk the night before, and he got really mad at me. This was a pattern. And I woke up the next day and was like, should we not go? And he was like, no, we should go. Pack your bag. I'm going to go run some errands, and then we'll leave that day. And I proceeded to get super drunk to deal with feeling so bad. It started off with, I'm just going to have a drink or two to feel better. And I proceeded to get very drunk and was packing, but I was just throwing things in a bag. And then I blacked out and I woke up in Kansas City, and he had just put me in the car and drove us there. And I looked in my bag, and it was the most haphazard packing job I could have ever done. I had like nothing that I needed. It was just a bunch of random clothes thrown into a bag. I didn't have like my contact lens stuff or all of this stuff I had gotten for this trip, my like a nice camera. And I was just like so mad at myself. Like I had just thrown like 5 or 6 pieces of clothing into a bag, and that's all I had for this 2-week trip. So a couple of months later, I started going on benders, like really bad benders, where I would drink 5, 6, 7 days in a row, morning till night. You know, I'm sure it started with the night going out, but waking up, drinking till 2, passing out, waking up at 7 or 8, drinking till 2, passing out, waking up at 6 a.m., drinking, passing out. And that fucked me up pretty bad. And I had a very almost fatal suicide attempt. And that was my first hospitalization. And then I came out. I kept trying to drink moderately. And then I had my second almost fatal suicide attempt. Was hospitalized for longer that time, but still somehow convinced me to let me go after 3 or 4 days. But then I started to get serious about needing to quit. And this was about 3 years ago that this happened. And a couple of months later, I ended up in detox. That was my first and only experience there. I was there for like 5 or 6 days because there was a snowstorm. So I kind of got stuck there. But I loved detox. I was there with a great group of people, and they were super loving and supportive, and they were all very different. And I just really liked being there. I didn't really want to leave because it felt like I had found like support, which I had never really looked for before. But after I left, I started working with a therapist. That started my 3-year struggle to get sober. In that past 3 years, I have bought a house, continued working in the field, but at all these different times I had to take an FMLA leave. I told them that I had a physical health issue and was sick, and really kept that from my employer, but it allowed me to continue to come back and work there. So again, I just didn't have a ton of consequences. I still felt like I was functioning, and I knew alcohol was the problem. And so I tried to just stop drinking and just do drugs instead with my homies, with my partner's friends, who are all really great people, but are all work in the engineering field and party maybe once every couple of months. Whereas I was partying, but then I made a friend who still lives up the street and found out he was a drug dealer. So he had coke and ketamine, and Molly. So I would stop drinking, but then I would buy an 8-ball and put it away for a rainy day for a party. And then in 2 days it'd be gone. And that happened multiple times. I would just go on a bender and just do it all. And anytime I relapse on alcohol, I would drink for multiple days. And a lot of my relapses were around just really difficult things happening or difficult feelings, as well as just a desire to be social and to connect with other people, because I didn't have a lot of that. But I will say I also did a lot of drinking and drug use alone towards the end, which is just sad. And definitely the benders, but I would also invite people over just so I didn't have to be alone. And they weren't people that I liked or people I was really connecting with. It was just people who I just wanted someone to do drugs with me. So I had many failed, sobriety attempts, relapses, and now, and I've been to AA in the past. During this past 3 years, I was in AA for a minute and had over 90 days and did really well. And then I relapsed, and my sponsor kind of left me high and dry in that moment when I really was hoping she would be there for me. So that made me really mad. And I said, screw it, I'm never going back. Because these people don't actually care. And it felt very cliquish, but I reached back out to her this last time, and I am at 30 days without any substance. And I am really excited, and I'm going back to AA. I go to dopey meetings, and I go to trauma recovery meetings. I have a lot more sober support, and taking care of myself, and just feel really good about it this time. So that's brings us here today to this point in time. I'm now 30 days sober. So thank you, everyone who stuck around to listen.